Everybody talks about the dinosaurs. You know, big scary lizards, the T-Rex, raptors, and all that jazz. But what nobody tells you is that the entire prehistoric world was so much cooler. And that's not just because of the dinosaurs. Everything was either oversized, armored, or poisonous, and just overall way cooler than they are today. So let's take a walk through time and take a look at some of the cooler animals from the past that I was able to find. First, I want to start with bugs. Bugs are already scary, but they were so much nastier, scarier, and bigger back then. Around 300 million years ago or so, during the Carboniferous period, the Earth's oxygen content was about 30 to 35%. That is 50% higher than it is today, which sounds great until you realize that oxygen is rocket fuel for evolution and how bugs grow. You see, insects don't have lungs. Instead, they have these little holes in their body that they absorb oxygen through, which they then use to fuel their growth. Therefore, more oxygen means bigger bugs. So that's how we got things like Meganeura, which I think I'm pronouncing that right, was a dragonfly that had a wingspan of around 2.5 feet. Dragonflies are pretty cool. I don't really have a problem with them. You know, they just kind of exist. They can't walk, they just fly. That's cool, I guess. But if they had a wingspan of 2.5 feet, I don't think I would think the same about them. And then we move on to centipedes, where back then we had the Arthroplura, which was a centipede, but it was the size of a crocodile. Centipedes, in my opinion, are already the most nasty and scary looking bug. So I can only imagine what I would do if one was the size of a crocodile and squirming around in my house. And while those are just two examples, I know that that would be enough to be pure nightmare fuel for some people, because I know some people that will run the second they see a fly. And the worst part about giant bugs is that you couldn't really scare them away with anything, because today you have mosquitoes, so you light a little fire, one of those little candle things. You couldn't do that back then because there was more oxygen. More oxygen not only means bigger bugs, but it also means everything is flammable. So the second you try to light something, the entire forest would go up like a matchstick. But that's enough of bugs. Let's go over something that people are terrified of today, but this time I don't necessarily agree with it. Sharks. They're just there to live their lives. You could argue the same for bugs, but bugs are nasty. Sharks are just kind of there. They're cool, they're big, they swim around. Don't mess with them, they won't mess with you for the most part. Sure, they might, come up, take a little nibble out of your leg thinking you're fish, but if they don't like the taste, they're just gonna swim away. If they do, good luck. But they are overall pretty chill. And I'm sure you can see where I'm going with this. Megalodon. Everybody knows the Megalodon. It's a giant prehistoric shark, 60 feet long, teeth the size of bananas, and people still think it's alive today. It's not, but they still think that. It is undoubtedly one of the coolest marine animals to ever exist, but there were weirder sharks, and we're about to talk about one of them. Meet Helicoprion. Once again, think I'm pronouncing that right. It was a shark, pretty average, but it had a buzzsaw for a jaw, and I wish I was joking. Its bottom teeth were arranged in a spiral, and scientists aren't 100% sure how they used it, but the leading theory right now is that they would go catch the fish, and their teeth would twist the fish into their mouth so that they could eat it. That's cool. Terrifying, but it's really cool. As for another cool looking fish, they had the Stephacanthus. It just kind of swim around, but it had an anvil shaped fin on its head. They don't know why. It was just kind of there. I mean, it's cool. Scientists do have a theory for this, and that theory is just that they used it for mating, attracting mates and whatnot, because nothing says date me like swimming around with an ironing board on your head. So yeah, there were plenty of cool ocean animals at that time, but the oceans are still pretty cool nowadays in my opinion, with sponges that look like actual alien life forms. So we're not going to dive too deep into that, and yes, the pun was intended. Going back to making things just bigger than they are today, we have snakes and crocodiles and turtles and stuff like that. They can get pretty big today, crocodiles and snakes can be pretty large, but a few million years ago, they were on a whole different level. Fast forward to the Paleocene and Eocene, which is what I will call the warm aftermath of the extinction of the dinosaurs. This is when animals would grow, and they would grow fast, and they would grow big. And our first example of this is the Titanoboa. You know it, I know it. Don't know if I love it, but I know it. It was a 40+ foot snake that weighed over a ton. It lived in hot, humid swamps and probably hunted crocodiles like they were snacks. Snakes nowadays can be pretty large. You have some pythons that could reach lengths of over 16 feet, but that's still not even half of the length of the Titanoboa. So yeah, it's safe to say that I would never be going near any swamps if I lived back then, or if those things were alive today. But speaking of swamps, there were other things like the But speaking of swamps, there were other things like the Purosaurus. I might not be pronouncing that one right. It was a 30-foot crocodilian that could crunch bones like they were potato chips. Its bite force is actually estimated to be around 15,000 pounds. So it was basically the hydraulic press of that era, if you would. So not only would I not go near a swamp, I would probably die before I could even get close. But that's enough of the water and scary, scaly looking things. Here's something that not only lived on land, but lived with humans. Giant ground sloths. These guys were over 20 feet tall, weighed several tons, and were armed with ginormous claws. Sure, they were herbivores, but if you were to mess with them, it's safe to say you would be dead. And when you think of a sloth, you think of a slow animal. But fossil evidence shows that they might have been faster than you might think, and probably could even run. That's terrifying. So yeah, if Ice Age was accurate, Sid would be something that nobody would want to mess with. And yeah, humans actually lived alongside these things and probably even hunted them with spears, which is wild to think about. I would never want to fight one of those things. So after seeing all of these giant creatures, you might be thinking, what happened to them? Where are they now? And well, the main reason would probably be climate change. And not just the climate change of now, the climate change of the past few million years, especially at the end of the Carboniferous. See, the creatures from back then just simply wouldn't be able to live in the world that we live in now, and that's because of mainly the reduced oxygen level. And, well, big animals require a lot of energy. And as the earth cooled, ecosystems shrank, and animals had to shrink with it so that they could become more efficient and, actually live. And, well, that would also be if most of them didn't die when the earth decided to press the big red reset button a few times and cause a few mass extinctions. So some animals today are kind of boring, but if I'm being honest, it's probably for the best. I do not want a 40-foot snake crawling around. So yeah, dinosaurs were cool, but the prehistoric world had so much more to offer. The buzzsaw shark, or dragonflies the size of eagles, or giant sloths that could probably powerlift a car if I had to guess. Nature used to be a whole other beast, and now instead we have pigeons and raccoons. But, like I said, maybe that's a good thing. So, like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and let me know in the comments, what is one prehistoric monster that you would never want to deal with? And yeah, I will see you in the next one.